Welcome to another DevOps.com webinar. Today's webinar is sponsored by Datadog, and we have what we think is going to be a really interesting webinar on ChatOps. ChatOps, conversation-driven DevOps. We're very lucky to have today two great panel members to explain to us about ChatOps and conversation-driven DevOps. First of all, from Datadog, we have Matt Williams, who is the evangelist at Datadog. Good morning, or good afternoon, good morning, Matt, depending where in the world you are today.
Good morning.
Good morning. It's afternoon here, morning. I think you're on the West Coast, you had mentioned.
I am today.
We're also very lucky to be joined by Ian Buchanan, who is a developer partisan at Atlassian. Ian, welcome to our webinar today.
Thank you very much, Alan.
Okay, that was our sound check. It sounds like both of these guys are here, and their sound sounds good. So I'm going to turn things over now to Ian, who's going to speak. And Matt, I think you're going to drive the slides, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, gentlemen, go right ahead.
Thank you much, Alan. So as Alan said, I'm Ian Buchanan. My title, Developer Partisan. You can take it offline as a Twitter conversation if you want to understand why I consider developer evangelism more of a political aspect than a religious one, and hence the title. I work at Atlassian, and we're all about empowering teams to move humanity forward through the power of software. It's a mission we've been on for the last dozen or so years since our founders released Jira, and so that's me. Matt?
Yeah, so I'm Matt Williams. I'm the evangelist over at Datadog, and you can reach me on Twitter at TechnoEvangelist. And Datadog is a SaaS-based monitoring platform, very affordable and really powerful, and you're going to see some of that a little bit later in this session.
Thanks. So I do hope folks will tweet at us during the presentation to ask us questions or let us know how we're doing, or if you just outright disagree, please engage us. So I'll get going where all conversations here on DevOps.com start, which is what is DevOps? And actually, I'm going to sidestep the detailed definition of this, really just to focus in on 4 characteristics that Damon Edwards put forward as CAMs. And he put these in a particular order because if you don't have culture right, you don't have the people and organization in place, then the rest is really quite fruitless. Automation comes next because it helps you get a handle on all of the kinds of systems that you're monitoring, measuring on all of the infrastructure that you have to get rolled out, all the deployments that have to happen. Measurement is also very important if you need to see what's going on, especially, Damon really refers to a well-known idea that if you can't measure it, you can't improve it. So measurement certainly very important in the DevOps world. And sharing, of course, is this viral mechanism. It's very important as an industry that if we all want to get better at doing deployments, then we really need to share our experiences outside our company walls. And that's why Matt and I are here today, to share experiences and a little bit of advice along the way. But let's drill down on ChatOps. I think ChatOps puts things on its head a little bit in that sharing becomes the most important aspect of ChatOps. Of course, we're going to talk about culture. Through ChatOps, you're also sharing culture across the developer and ops boundary. You're using automation in a shared context. And you're sharing measurement as well. So I hope you'll understand as we walk through these different pieces that across all of this is the importance of sharing. So let's drill down on the first part of ChatOps, which is just chat. It's very important for your culture in the sense that this is where your organization gets together. This is where a lot of the cultural norms will be formed. This is where people are really interacting. And so I would have people answer for themselves, like kind of think of the last time that you had a production outage. If you got together as a war room, was it a physical place? Was it a conference call? Or, like at Atlassian, was it a chat application? So of course at Atlassian we use HipChat, and if you'll forgive my shameless hawking of a product here. We really just want to use this as a concrete example so that you understand the experiences that we've been through and can relate here. A lot of what I'm about to explain really does apply to many other kinds of products. So one of the things that we use HipChat for in an emergency situation is to get the team together. All of the teams in Atlassian have their own team rooms. That of course is very handy for them to do their day-to-day collaborations. We also have some additional rooms outside of just team rooms that are really organized around longer running threads. Things like our production outages are a room which provides a persistent log over time, and that's really different from having per incidence spaces set up for these things. That means that we have a history that we can look back on and ask some meta questions. Things like, why is this class of problem happening so often? Or how can we solve it faster next time? In addition to connecting the team, it's really easy to reconnect inside of HipChat. With offices in Sydney, Amsterdam, San Francisco, we're spread around the world. And as a result of being spread around the world, we're also spread over the clock. So that means that some people are just coming into their workday, may need to get up to speed on a particular situation, and catching up is just as easy as going into the team room and finding what conversations have happened before. That means no more awkward questions like, have you tried turning it off and on again, when people have already asked that. So it's also very easy to mention others. With this @mention, we can pull in others as they're needed. Again, people who are just invited to the conversation can quickly catch up with the log history. And we don't just invite people into our rooms either. We employ a lot of robots at Atlassian. Well, I say employ, but we don't really pay them. So we use a lot of automation for all of the teams. And that's really where ChatOps hits the road. So we have a lot of integrations that may pump information into a particular team's room to give additional context to what's going on. And in many cases, some of the bots are doing work on behalf of people on the team. So let's take a look at what one of those rooms might look like and see some of the messages that come into the HipChat world. Here we're looking at a typical HipChat room for a dev team. There's information here about what has gone into the source code repository. In the form of pull requests, there are lightweight code reviews going on here and merges as those code reviews are completed. So those are some of the examples of the things that we see in chat. But as we kind of drill down on that version control thing for a moment, I'd like to just kind of explain why. Well, if version control has been around for a while, what's so great about this in the world of DevOps? Well, I think that the idea of infrastructure as code really forces this issue more. And it's not just that there's automation here involved. That's an important aspect. But it really means sharing between the dev and ops team. There's sharing going on here about the specifications for infrastructure, and then a consistent tool in place that helps with the auditability of what changes are being made to the infrastructure. So there are some things that we found in addition to just the fact that there is version control between these two groups. At Atlassian, we use Git, and we found that this is really changing the way that people work at Atlassian. And I posit that there are a number of reasons that this is different from previous version control systems. It's really through better branching and lightweight code reviews that people's behaviors are changing. And to give you a specific data point about how things are improving, this is a survey that we took a couple years ago now, over 1,000 respondents across several different, across several different conferences that we attended. And what's demonstrated here is that there is a high correlation between frequent releases and the use of Git as compared to Subversion. So correlation is not necessarily causation. So what really explains this underlying correlation? Well, I posit that it has a lot to do with the difference in the way that people can do branching and merging in Git. It provides a higher level of isolation so people can do better work in parallel. in the end, there's a higher confidence in the code that is merged in, and so it gets deployed even faster. So let me drill down on this branching idea a little bit, because if you've been around the world of Subversion, it may be a little bit different. So we have a typical workflow here that would be in the Subversion world, which is a straight linear flow. Long time from even CVS days, and unfortunately some people carry this into the Git world as well. The problem with this linear flow is really twofold. One is that we don't, if you're doing continuous integration, you really don't have a clear idea of what the boundaries are between, or you don't have a good isolation of work. So if you're working on one piece, the build breaks, then you really have to have a stop the line mentality, and everybody has to wait for the build to get fixed by the people who have made the change. And it's not really like lean stop the line either, because we can't turn and ask the manager to help 5Y the problem with us. We have to continue through and use the pair or the individual who made the change to best understand how their change broke the build, and then they have to go through the process of fixing it. So a similar thing happens at release time, that while these changes may be atomic with regard to passing unit tests, that doesn't mean that they're necessarily functionally cohesive. So that's really what's illustrated in this picture, that different commits may be related to different kinds of issues or stories or whatever the units of work are in your world. And so what that means is that in a rush to really make sure that the features are functionally coherent, that a lot of people resort to putting a freeze on the work, to a code freeze, so that we don't get unnecessary or unwanted changes to the code base while we're trying to get a release out the door. So the good thing about Git is really that it addresses this with the idea of a feature branch. And what's different about Git's branching workflow is not just that when you branch off and you can work on these isolated features on the branch, but when you merge back in, you have a couple things going on. One, you have a smarter merge capability under the hood, so the merge process is easier, but also the isolated feature work can be run through a continuous integration. This means that you have a clearer idea of what your changes are going to do to the master branch. And the consequence is that your isolated feature work doesn't interfere with the things that are on the stable master branch. So effectively, your stable master branch is releasable at any time. And this can be elaborated even further with a more elaborate branching workflow, where the branches represent not just feature branches, but also different branches for your environment. Matt, yeah, thanks. So in this case, we have master, which would be sent off to production, but we also have a develop branch where you merge all of the feature branches into. This means that you're really much better able to catch integration, real integration issues before they hit the production environment. Another consequence is that you can really deploy all of these branches just to different environments as appropriate. So for example, deploy can be put into a staging environment, and so you really have the practice of doing continuous deployment, even if only to an internal environment. Another consequence, or if that's what's good for developers, what's good for the operations side is a much clearer connection between the environment and where it came from. So effectively, you have this idea that master is production. And so what we use around Git to really help us with all of the branching and repositories and collaborations is a Git wrapper called Bitbucket. That's our hosted version of this. We also have a stash for behind the firewall. And what this helps us do, one of the lightweight collaborations, is this idea of code review. Yeah, and so if I chose this slide because if you've ever been involved in a code review, then you may have felt this way before. Just like a child, that if the first time you do this, it may be very uncomfortable. But just like the bath is for a child, in the long run helps the child's hygiene, so too the code review is a process that helps your code hygiene. And so one of the things that we do to make sure that this is not an onerous process and not very painful is use the pull request capabilities in Bitbucket for keeping things lightweight. So it's just really a discussion thread. In addition, the code review processes, we keep the branches very short. So branches at Atlassian are on average a 2-day branch, and that helps really make sure that we don't defer the integration work for too long. So it really appeals to the continuous integration side of things. But it also means that the changes that we make are a much smaller set, and that leads to much more collaboration in the code review process, better feedback, and better learning, even from people who don't participate actively in the code review. So you might be asking, like, okay, if we add something to our process, won't this just make the release cycle take longer, or takes longer to deploy code? So I'll refer back to this survey data again, and here we find that people who do code review versus people who don't, again, we find this correlation to a higher deployment cycle, so faster deployment times. And again, correlation is not causation, so I posit that the real explanation for this is that the code review process results in higher confidence in the process itself, so there's a greater degree of trust, and there's less rework as bugs come back through the process and are escalated and interrupt the flow of deployment. So yeah, so one of the things you may be asking now, even more than this, is what does any of this have to do with ChatOps? And I'd like to pose that this is really just an example of one of the things that you can do to take what specialists normally do on a day-to-day basis and help take some of the most common things and pull them into the ChatOps context so that everybody can see what happens, by whom, and when. So the first example that I have here is what you might post to the Bitbucket API in order to cause it to merge that pull request after the manual review has happened on it. You're ready to put that into the develop branch. So you might use that API request. And the second one is a git command that an expert might use to take all of the changes that have been bundled up on the developing branch and push them into the master branch, and then put that into the central repository. But what we can do is replace these highly technical commands with something a little bit more simplified and put that into the chat context. So using a bot, like this HipBot idea here, we would be able to merge a particular repository and the pull request in it, or just simplify the git commands, isolate that all together so that HipBot does the deployment work to push that into the master branch, and then let continuous integration or continuous deployment tools take over from there. So again, I just point out a couple things here. The point is not to necessarily automate all of the things. You do have specialists and experts in these different areas who understand how all of these tools work, but really you want to take the most common flows, the things that people are doing very often, and put some automation around that. That gives a chance for the less technical folks on the team, maybe even non-technical folks on the team, to see and understand when these things have happened, and also over time perhaps even do these things themselves. So what you're doing is removing the bottlenecks in the most primary flows. So just kind of overall, if you are finding that the automation of deployment is something that may be a little bit too ambitious in your organization, don't fret. Monitoring is a good place to begin as well, and that's where I'll hand over to Matt to explain a little bit more.
Okay, great. So as a reminder, my name's Matt Williams, and I'm the evangelist over at Datadog, and I want to talk about the monitoring part of ChatOps, and this is often where operations is a little bit more involved. So why does the conversation need to go both ways? does dev need talking to each other? Well, that's really, if you try to define what DevOps is, well, if you ask 10 people who work with DevOps, what is DevOps, you'll get probably 10 definitions, but at its heart, it's all about communication. Dev should be having that conversation with Ops, and it's a two-way conversation, to ensure that everything runs and everyone's happy. From the Ops side of things, many of those conversations are going to start with automated content, like alerts or performance stats, as well as ways to improve based on previous experience. And much of those conversation starters are coming from a monitoring platform. Now, whatever monitoring platform you use will help you understand what's going on in your environment. It should alert you to the problems that might be occurring. It should help you come up with the right alerts. And it should have tools you need to be able to learn more about your environment. Now, it's easy with a lot of platforms to send out alerts every time something hits a certain threshold on a specific machine. What's harder is being able to create those alerts on classes of machines. Now, we use tags, and you might be familiar with tags maybe on your desktop, on Windows or OS X, or maybe in your email. In Gmail, you can add tags to mail messages. But tags on the monitoring platform is actually kind of rare. So with tags, you can find all the machines that are, say, running Nginx, or running Cassandra, or running Postgres, or all the AWS instances in US East 1A, or US West, or Europe, or somewhere else, or all the machines serving the front end. Now, those groups of machines could all be the same, or they could be completely different, or they might just have a few machines in common. It doesn't really matter. Because they've been assigned tags that describe their applications, their roles, their locations, hosts, and more, we can zoom in or out to see just machines that matter to us based on whatever question we have right now. Now, I'm going to come back to this a little bit later when we get into a short demo. What of messages can store conversations? Well, I looked at our environment in Datadog and found a few good examples in our environment to give you an idea of what kind of things start out as or initiate a conversation in HipChat. So the following are 3 different screenshots from our application that started new conversations. And there's some interesting things to note about each of these. First off, they're all pushed out to HipChat to start that bigger conversation. In Datadog, you can take a snapshot of any graph, add some text that describes why you wanted to take note of it, and then since the note starts with @HipChatOps, it's pushed to the Ops room on HipChat. I've just got a. I notice that my audio is breaking up a little. Is this okay at the moment? Yes. Okay. Cool. Also note, and then another interesting thing to notice about this particular screenshot is that it's not an application that would typically be in the realm of ops. It's not a Redis or Cassandra or Nginx or Postgres or Elasticsearch or something else, all of which we use, but rather it's one of the internal applications that helps us do our job at Datadog, but isn't directly seen by customers. And so Ops started a conversation about an app written by devs to see if this is something to be concerned about. Here's another one that started the conversation using our annotation tool that calls attention to a specific portion of the chart. And finally, another looking at an app called Kima. Now, in case you're curious, or in case those sound kind of familiar, every source for all their, sometimes it's Star Wars, sometimes it's Star Trek, sometimes it's Lord of the Rings. And for us at Datadog, it's all about the TV show The Wire. So Daniels, Kima, Sabatka, many others. Anyway. So when the conversations are moved into chat applications like HipChat, they become the de facto documentation because they describe how the app is really used rather than just how it was designed in theory. I write much of the documentation in Datadog, and I'm trying to ensure that I cover all the bases and really document everything about how you use the application. But sometimes it's not going to directly apply to how you use it inside your environment. And this is a great place for chat. But one thing about putting that, making that HipChat conversation the de facto documentation is that you need to go through those archives on a fairly regular basis to pull out what's really important and to permanently document those experiences. Because just like in real life, when I have a conversation with somebody, we'll talk about our main topic, but there's all sorts of other things that come into the middle of those conversations. And it's important for me to document that original question, what were all the things that led up to the answer, and what is the answer, and leave out all that extra stuff that doesn't really relate to the actual question. Now, when you use Datadog to start these conversations in a tool like HipChat, it's good to know that you can return to get help, get more context as you try to understand the issue. Now, to get a better idea of this integration between these different tools, let's switch to a little demo. Now, for the demo, I thought about doing a live demo, but there's a few steps that take 10 to 60 seconds, and I don't want you to sit and wait for that. I'm doing this as experience. Now, for my example, I created a super simple web app. Now, this is actually a Golang app using Martini and Redis as a backend. Now, I went up to Twitter and downloaded my tweet history, which is an amazing feature that they finally released. And so now I downloaded the CSV file filled with about 10,000 tweets that I've done since 2007. On its first run, my little Go app grabs that CSV file and imports all that data into a Redis database. Then I can page through the app to see all my tweets. Now, it's super basic now, but should be perfect for our specific needs. So the app is actually delivered using Docker. Now, as a side note, if you are using Docker and haven't gotten into using Docker Machine and Docker Compose, formerly known as Fig, you really got to check those out. It makes things so much easier. Now, here's my Docker Compose YAML file, and you can see that I've got 3 Docker containers. Now, Redis is just a standard one, and Datadog is running as a privileged container. My web container simply grabs the latest code from my Bitbucket repo and then runs the app. Now, since the code is on Bitbucket, my team can create issues about what needs to be changed or updated in the app. Now, in this case, someone suggested changing the link on the nav bar to point to the home page. Kind of an obvious mistake that I left out. Feel kind of guilty for not putting it there, but now I know I can resolve it. But it's just having an issue is one thing, but there's one type of person that might be hanging out on Bitbucket and looking at issues, but there's many other people in the organization, and they're all in HipChat or whatever chat platform you're using. And so they can, they'll be in this platform, and they can see these types of comments and add additional commentary about why this feature needs to be done, or some context about which customers are asking for this feature, or more ideas about how they can improve this feature. Now, Bitbucket is automatically pushing all this data about pull requests and issues and all this stuff into HipChat. And of course, that all is configurable. You can say, I only want pull requests, or I only want issues, or I want everything. There's a bunch of configurations you can do. So in this case, somebody else in the organization has added, in this case, a kind of a silly comment, but you could imagine that other comments would come in here, and when I go to make a change, I can get a little bit more context about the issue by reading up on the discussion in HipChat. Okay, so based on all that information, I go into my code editor, make that simple change, and then I test it out. In this case, I'm testing out using Gin just to make sure that it works correctly. Now, since I'm using Docker Machine, I guess I really should have created my containers locally and tested an environment that's more in sync with production, but I just love using Gin for those super quick checks. Then I added the updated file and committed the code and pushed it up to Bitbucket. Now, because I mentioned issue 3 in my commit message, Bitbucket has automatically resolved the issue and posted that message onto HipChat. So we've got the entire life cycle of that issue all in HipChat, all within that conversation. Because I've set up the integration with Datadog and Bitbucket, I can also see that commit come up in my event stream. This will be really useful later on as I'm monitoring, and I can see not only the stats, the metrics that talk about my app, but in the background I can also see all the events that are related to that, like all my pull requests, all my commits, all my issues, and so forth. The last step is to build my updated containers. So I just do a build and launch them on my AWS Docker instance. Now, I created a custom dashboard on Datadog for this app, and I can see all the stats I care about most on one screen. Notice at the top I'm looking at some Docker-related stats, and I can see my Docker CPU per hour in that long chart. But to the left, I've got CPU for the day, and then to the right, CPU for the month. Now, I haven't been running this for a month worth of data, so that little line is a lot shorter. Below that, I've got some Redis information. In this case, it's Redis CPU, and I'm overlaying data that's in yellow is the live data. The dashed or the dotted lines are data that's 1 hour old, so just subtract an hour. And then the other one, the kind of dashed line, is 24-old Redis data, 24-hour old. And there's a bunch of other stats here as well. I can see how many Docker containers are running, how many Docker containers specific to Redis, and how many keys are in my Redis data store, and so forth. And I've just got a few other screenshots so you can see, how this changes over time. I'll just flip through some of these real quick. And so now at this point, if something came up that was interesting or unexpected, I could start that conversation by clicking on the little snapshot icon and starting that conversation within Bitbucket. And so this is something that we do in real life at Datadog. We'll often find issues with our platform. Maybe it's an issue that's affecting a real customer right now, or it's just something we want to improve, and we continue that discussion in HipChat. And so now at this point, we want to share a little bit more about our specific experiences. And Ian and I will have a little bit of a conversation about our experiences. So Ian, what can you tell us about some of your specific examples of how you use ChatOps?
Yeah, at Atlassian, we find that what is really enriched by a ChatOps kind of experience is a lot like what you were showing, that being able to call up the particular data as an issue, as an incident is in flight, helps us really preserve the kind of like a chain of evidence, like understand the work that it took to solve a particular issue. And that's a little bit more interesting than just having okay, it opened at a particular time, ended at a particular time. Yeah, those kind of statusy important things need to get bubbled up somewhere. But this gives us new insight into why it took so long to solve a particular issue. It gives us some idea what kind of information we should make more easily available. And so, preserving that kind of trace through solving a particular issue is really interesting from the ChatOps perspective.
Yeah, I mean we've experienced the same thing at Datadog, and often as IT or dev professionals, we'll go to a source of information, whether that's going to be, well, in a lot of cases for me that's the Stack Exchange websites. And so depending on the topic that I'm dealing with, I'll go to one of the different Stack Exchange sites, and yeah, I guess I could ask a question, but usually I'm looking around for questions that have already been asked by others. And after the question's been asked, within a few hours or a few days, the right question bubbles up to the top, and you see that at the top of the list with a big check. And that's great. I see the question, I see the answer, but I don't always see the conversation about how somebody reached that answer. Usually the person who answers that question has a lot of expertise, and they've learned how to answer that specific question, and they've just given you the answer. But it's often, if I look at that, I see the answer. Okay, that's great. I can solve my problem today, but I don't really remember it because I haven't been involved in how they came to that answer. And if I'm involved in a HipChat discussion and we're find out all the different ways people might resolve this issue, I'm a little bit more in touch with how to resolve it, and at least personally, I find that I'm much more likely to actually remember this stuff when I'm involved in that process. So that's one of the things I really enjoy about getting those discussions in. One other thing that we do at Datadog, Ian talked about automating certainties, and we do that when it's time to do certain deploys to our kind of a staging version or production version. We can do that with inside of HipChat. We can certain people that are members of a group can enter a specific command, and like magic, the stuff happens in the background. Jenkins goes ahead and does its tests and deploys, and we get a little bit of feedback in the chat application. So that makes it's just an easier way of going about it. So somebody doesn't have to switch context, switch over to in this case Jenkins or something else and remember the commands that are specific to that environment. They can just stay in their chat platform and enter in that command. Ian, you've got experiences like that as well, right?
Yeah, and I think like you've really hit the nail on the head with like when the automated deploys are triggered from the chat context. There's a lot more information that is around that. So that automation is possible in there. Instead of having somebody have the chat, like, okay, I'll go do that, you really see what the command is, and then other people can pick on it, or pick up on how that works. So it's become a really good learning tool for a company growing as fast as Atlassian is right now. That's become a very important resource, is to be able to enable people much more quickly, and so that's been very valuable to automate those things within the chat context.
Yeah, well, one other really super important task we hand off to one of our bots on HipChat is now. An outsider might not understand this, but somehow those animated GIFs of cats are really important. And so we've got a little thing you can say, hey, show me something funny about this particular thing, and it somehow randomly finds the most perfect animated GIF of a cat. So I think at this point, you have anything else? Any other examples, Ian?
No, that's it.
Yeah, okay. So at this point, I think we're going to switch over to questions.
Great. Matt, it's Alan. I'll take over for the questions. First of all, guys, thanks very much for a good in-depth review right there, and I think we have some questions that have been sent in. Let me read the first one, though, that is out here. And this is one that's near and dear to my heart, is how do you handle security and authentication? Ian, I don't know if that would be a you question.
Yeah, is that for Ian or?
Well, I think he's talking about how do you handle security and authentication, using HipChat. And if I'm wrong, please correct me. But it's always, having spent the last 12 years of my life in the information infosec world, I always worry about how do we handle security and authentication. Why don't we throw it about both of you? Ian, if you could speak specifically about HipChat and security and authentication, and Matt, maybe you can talk a little bit about how Datadog handles that.
Sure.
Yeah, so I'll start by saying that, I think, it would be important to really separate two aspects of the security. One is that if you have bots, the information may go in two directions. So if you want information to flow into HipChat, then you'll need HipChat credentials there. I'm actually not sure how long the whole roadmap is, but we're looking at really filling out our security portfolio with things like OAuth 2. and so that's getting information in. And then also, as you use bots to do work on your behalf, and those bots need some credentials to the systems that they interact with. The bot infrastructure really is something that you have to figure out how to manage for yourself. Some things may need to be behind the firewall and be able to check in with HipChat for their commands. If it's behind the firewall and that's the only mode of interaction, then you may be able to use appropriate behind the firewall type things like SSH. Or if you have a hosted bot and you're doing some things that are for cloud services, then it's going to be what's appropriate there. So if you're doing something with AWS, which is a service that we use a lot, then that bot needs the credentials to work with AWS. So kind of two sides of that coin. Information coming in needs the HipChat credentials, and the information or the systems manipulated by bots are going to vary from system to system. For Bitbucket, again, we can kind of come back and say that there are things like OAuth 1.0 is supported now, and 2.0 is on the horizon.
Excellent. Ian, a follow-up question here is, can any HipChat user deploy to production?
In our Atlassian world, that is how we use those rooms. One of the things that I would stress there is that as our bots are created by specialists, we make sure that those specialists are doing the things that make sure people don't shoot themselves in the foot. So for us, we really believe that deployment to production is like a business. It's a human decision, and that the right steps have been taken there. That's part of the culture. But then the automation of that, we just pretty much hand that off. Well, I think it depends. Like we have a lot of the systems that we would deploy are things like billing systems. Many of our products themselves are behind the firewall, and releasing is kind of a different thing. It's not exactly the continuous deployment. It's just a release process. But in both cases, we've really enabled pretty much anybody who has access to the room to come in and run those commands.
Yeah, and I mean at Datadog, correct me if I'm wrong. I'm pretty sure that we've got some rooms that when you set up HipChat, you can set up rooms that are specific to teams. So we've got several teams that are invited to that room, and some of those rooms you have to be a member of this team. You have to be invited to get into that room. Whereas others are public. There's a general civilians chat room where everybody's talking about all sorts of things that are somewhat related or unrelated to the business. But then there are other rooms that are specific to a particular team, and some of those everyone's allowed to see what's going on, and some of them are just for the operations people where I don't have access. And then some of the ones that are some of the ones that I don't have access to, they are running those commands. They've used HipChat to help automate that process, but only the right people can see and access those types of commands. That was my whole thought around that.
Okay, just a follow-up. And as I got to tell you, as a security person, that is something that scares me, is that anyone can promote something to production. But Ian, as a follow-up to our questioner on the security question was, sort of the example was, how do you control the following HipChat users can do X? Can we do it by individual users, or in my mind, is it just everyone who has access to that particular room?
I suppose you could get very clever with bots to try to detect who has said what. But in my experience, the more practical is that using the implicit access to a HipChat room as the security control is really a much easier and more transparent way to understand. Okay, if I can see the person in this room, then they have access to do the thing. So that's my experience there.
Yep, so locked chat rooms being good for security makes sense. So another question that came in is, we hear a lot, especially in the ChatOps world, about open APIs and how easy is it to integrate third-party integrations and bots and so forth. And, experiences, the devil's in the details. Matt, or maybe it's Ian. Can you talk a little bit about really what's involved in getting that integration done?
Yeah, I mean, in order to do any sort of these integrations, it's not just a matter of having access to the API endpoint. You also need access to, maybe there's an API key or some sort of other secret. And if you have access to all those, yes, you can do those integrations. Now it's up to your IT team to make sure that, or your ops team to make sure that, those types of credentials are secret and not being shared out with the wrong types of people who create. I don't know, are there devs that are going to be creating bad integrations? I guess there are, but it's up to your ops team to make sure that those are under the right lock and key. Was that the question? I think.
Somewhat. I mean, just how, I guess a higher level variety of that question, and I'm paraphrasing what other people have asked here, is really kind of what's involved in integrating into a ChatOps, for instance.
Ah.
Yeah, I think that's a great
an Ian question.
Yeah, and I think it's a great question because this is one of those areas where like there was ChatOps before there was ChatOps, or maybe it's more precise to say there was automation that was triggered from bots well before the term ChatOps was coined. And so there are many bot frameworks in pretty much every language. I've been doing a lot of exploration lately with and Will in Python. There's HuBot, which is really the, I think the most, sort of the granddaddy of chatbot frameworks. So there are lots of frameworks to leverage and make it pretty easy. Of course, I think this still comes back to what Matt was saying, is that bots are code that you have to get your ops folks involved with. They have to deploy it, maintain it, and so even with the bot code, there may be a little bit of a continuous deployment cycle that you want to run there.
Sure.
I think, yeah.
Let me throw in. We have another question. What about chat ops and chat rooms that involve cross-organizational teams? So a joint Atlassian Datadog chat room. What are kind of some of the ground rules for that? Where you're going to have, obviously, security is a different breed there. We have different companies involved.
Yeah, and actually this corresponds to a tweet that I got directed at me from Brett Bendixson. He was asking that, like the HipChat folks have tweeted out that like a few weeks ago that there will be HipChat support with multiple teams. And I think, okay, so we already have multiple teams in Atlassian using this, but I'm pretty sure he means really like multiple organizations, like 2 different orgs being able to use the HipChat. So it's a feature on our radar. But I've used HipChat in a context like have an open HipChat channel that people can join. It can be useful for like a support context. But you really kind of have 2 modes there. It's either you're logged in or you allow anonymous access to a chat room. So we're looking at filling that out a bit.
Yep.
And I think a lot of that isn't so much the technology, but just making sure that your users are trained in what they're allowed to say to this other organization. I guess over the last few years, organizations have come up with rules about what you're allowed to say on Twitter. When you have an email conversation between, we're getting set up for this webinar, maybe some of those messages we need to make sure that we're not revealing too much. And what's too much? Well, it depends on your organization, and that's up to somebody in your organization to come up with, what are the, and in most cases, it's pretty much common sense, but for some people, we need to make sure we have rules about, what are the kinds of things that you are supposed to say, and if there are people that can't abide by those rules, maybe they shouldn't be involved in the conversations. But it's more of a people and process kind of question rather than the technology question.
Yeah, never underestimate the lack of common sense, Matt, in the world.
Yeah.
It's a lesson I've learned the hard way many times. So, I have a personal question now, if you don't mind. We've adopted a ChatOps approach here at DevOps.com, and our team sometimes communicates on it. We find it much, much faster than email. But I personally find myself yearning for like some kind of Uber ops communication where it incorporates email and Twitter and chat and everything into one sort of super duper interface. And what you think we'll ever see something like that, guys?
I think if we did, my brain would explode.
You'd explode.
Yeah.
I just, we went to ChatOps because it was fast and it's instant communication, much faster than email. But yet now I find that, we're 1/3 email, 1/3 ChatOps. We're still using Gmail chat, some of us, and
I think a lot of those different mechanisms have different purposes and different types of information that you're sharing. HipChat is going to be great for those quick, I've got a quick question, or I've got maybe a detailed question, but it's not going to be 5 paragraphs. I've seen a few HipChat messages that are 5 paragraphs, but they tend to be really short questions that you can answer super quick. But if you've got to share, we use HipChat, but we also use email. And for email, we're sending out, here's how to sign on to the latest VPN software, or here's how to, we're changing security codes, so make sure you know your new security code to get in the building. Those types of things usually are sent on email because they're a little bit more detailed. But then at the same time, there's also, we'll share a document link to a Google Doc where it goes into even more detail, and that way it's more available longer term, and it can go into a lot more detail. So it really depends on the context and the type of information that you're sharing, depending, to figure out which mechanism you're going to use to share this information.
Excellent. Business models wise, Ian, can you just touch on the Atlassian business model behind HipChat?
Oh, sure. In fact, I think that maybe even leads into our last slide here, where we ask people to take a 7-day free trial. There's also the HipChat base product is free. Actually, we've got Mike online who wants to.
Yeah, I'll jump in on that.
That would be that last slide I was supposed to add, and I didn't.
Oh, okay. So, hey everybody, this is Mike Rosell. I'm with Atlassian. I just wanted to clarify some things on that. Well, on the last slide that apparently we didn't put in, but that's totally cool. So all of our products come with a free trial across the board, and that varies whether it's our cloud product or server. But the one thing that's great about both Bitbucket and HipChat is they're both absolutely free. So Bitbucket is absolutely free for up to 5 users. HipChat is absolutely free for up to an unlimited number of users, but in the base version. So in the base version, we don't have voice and video. We don't have unlimited persistent search to where we log all of your chats, so they're always there and accessible. But that's really the only differences. So we're really eager to drive usage of HipChat. And I think when you compare this to anything else out there on the market, and you compare the price point of free versus some rather expensive product, it's an incredible value. And then just really quick as well, to go back to Alan's comment about Twitter, we do have a number of different Twitter integrations, and I don't want to misspeak, but I think we've also just launched a new Twitter integration, or that's something that I've just let the cat out of the bag on, that's coming very, very soon. But you'd be able to receive, obviously, Twitter notifications in different rooms, depending on your preference. So if you have a Twitter handle for your support team, you could get that about support. If you just have a general one that goes to your marketing team, you could have a marketing room and get updates about different marketing events as well. So I wanted to jump in on that quickly as well.
Not a problem.
Yeah,
Mike.
I've noticed there's a pretty recent project on I saw it on. Well, I think I saw it somewhere on GitHub that is a little some sort of bot that plugs into HipChat and kind of becomes the integration between maybe other chat platforms you might be using, and as well as other your chat that's on the on your website for customer support, as well as through to email or to Twitter or to other things. So there's an interesting project out there. It was recently available.
So, Matt, that may make your head explode, but it's coming. That's what I'm looking for.
It's
my Uber integration interface.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, and at Datadog, I mean, we've got a free trial as well, 14-day free trial, so you can load up as many hosts as you can fit. Well, as many hosts as you want to monitor. We've also got a free version as long as you're doing 5 hosts or less, and our pricing is really simple: $15 per month per host. Go to datadoghq.com and find out more. Sign up for trial. It's awesome.
Excellent. Excellent. Okay, guys, we're at the top of the hour. We're going to, I think, take a wrap on this webinar. Again, this is Alan Schimmel of DevOps.com. We do these webinars pretty regularly. If you go to our website at DevOps.com and look under webinars, you can see a full schedule. Until next time, Matt, thank you for once again providing us with an excellent webinar, and thanks to Datadog for being today's sponsor. Ian, thank you for some great information on ChatOps and Atlassian, and I think our audience appreciated it, and we'd love to have you back at some point. For anyone interested, thank you. Guys, for anyone interested, the slides of this will be made available up on DevOps.com, hopefully by tomorrow morning, and the recorded MP4 version on YouTube and DevOps.com should be available within 24 to 48 hours. Again, gentlemen, thank you. Have a great day. And this is Alan Schimmel signing off for DevOps.com.